Hello, good morning, and welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's. I think that's got a nice ring to it, don't you? The podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
And good morning from me. It's Tuesday, March the 11th. I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico with Sam Coates of Sky News. And we're going to be focusing on how the home front is rearing its head again.
So much of that to chew over. Planning, rubbish, lots of stories loosely under the heading of bad behaviour, including, and our first by-election in this parliament in Runcorn. Mike Amesbury has quit. He gave a departing interview saying, and get this, he actually picked up some casework in prison. Isn't going to have to do any more. But while he was waiting sentencing, he actually, the life of an MP never stops, I think was the point that he was making. And of course, there's no resolution to that row between Shabana Mahmood and the Sentencing Council. So the row over so-called two-tier sentencing goes on. And we'll have the latest polling as well. And just because this is a bucket of things that we're keeping an eye on, I'm just going to say it, and I'm going to say it no more strongly than this. I think there are some fresh jitters about the future of the Speaker. If it keeps going, this is one for another day. But there have just been too many stories now about his expenses and the role of his wife on trips. And I hardly need remind listeners of this podcast who will have the 2000 and 2010s political history around speakers engraved on their minds that the issue of things like trips has felled previous speakers. So let's see whether that keeps rumbling on. However, Anne, the biggest thing kind of in global politics at the moment is what's going on with Ukraine over in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, the peace talks that are going on. And we were going to skip all non-domestic stuff today, but you've picked up a bit of intel and got a bit of context. So do you want to just bring us up to date? Because it is so important for the future of Keir Starmer, what happens over there, as well as the future of Ukraine. What's been going on overnight, and what have you heard?
Yeah, I do think this is a bit of a split screen moment, Sam. I think we both feel that domestic politics is back with a vengeance. It's also where the government wants our attention on things like planning, welfare reform we'll turn to a bit later. But over in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, the leader there, the Crown Prince, has been meeting the Ukrainian delegation and Marco Rubio representing President Trump. And this is really going to be the meeting in the next couple of days. I think we will see the shape of the peace deal. Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, what has he actually been saying and how has he been saying it? Well, he went off at the weekend and spent a lot of time in Kyiv with Andrei Yermak, the closest advisor to Zelensky. And what I gather his message is that there's really no more point in trying to sort of litigate with the Americans that you should do this, you should do that, we need you for peacekeeping, for the future of Europe, all that stuff, true as it may be, does not particularly wash with this administration. But there is a point that I think Jonathan Powell has been making, and the Ukrainian side will think is in their interest, which is to say, look, to the Americans, whatever you think, whatever our differences, you cannot trust the Russians. And you've seen this again and again, and you don't want them to have the advantage over you. So in order to deliver on that, you still need to give us this peacekeeping guarantee. We're prepared to give up some things on the Ukrainian side in order to get there. But it's not only us, Ukraine, that needs this guarantee, Sam. It's you, the Americans, because if not, you're at the mercy of Vladimir Putin, and that would be a bad deal, as the president might see it.
So that's really interesting. So the British poise, Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, is basically telling Zelensky's team to make the argument that you can't trust Russia, and that's why you need to beef up security. I mean, when I watch back the Zelensky-Trump press conference now, almost 10 days ago, one of the messages that Zelensky was trying to land with Donald Trump was, we've had promises from Putin before with previous administrations, but those promises just don't hold, and he's broken them. All the agreements and stuff that we've signed before have just been broken by Russia in the past. Do we think that argument will land any better now than it did 10 days ago when Zelensky tried it out on Trump directly?
It's a very fair point. What are the differences, Sam? Well, the first one is, and the American side has made this very clear, I think it's the last words of Rubio before he got on the plane, was that they expect concessions from Zelensky. That was clearly not Zelensky's mindset in that meeting. So that's one thing I think that has become very clear to the Ukrainian side, that regrettably it is going to have to make some forms of concessions on freezing the conflict, or in essence on the territorial side of the war. The other thing that's different, and I think this is exactly what our national security advisor will be saying to theirs, is that, yes, it's true. When you go and say, we're Ukraine, we don't believe Russia because they've lied to us several times before and then invaded us. That was all about Ukraine, and that maybe was the problem with the framing of that. You're saying now to the Trump team through Rubio, hang on, this is going to be you who gets fooled if this goes wrong, not just us in Kyiv. And this is a risk for you. And come on, you're too smart to buy this from Vladimir Putin. So it leans much more into the deal-making side of Donald Trump, and also the slightly thin-skinned, I would suggest, aura of the American administration, which, they don't want to be the ones who get fooled.
I was talking to an ex-official last night who was giving top marks to Jonathan Powell in his role as National Security Advisor, filling all of what feels like the space on foreign affairs. But they were bemoaning the lack of Jonathan Powell type figure, or Jonathan Powell himself, actually doing the same job on the domestic agenda, because that has been altogether trickier for this administration since Labour came in. And that's really where the focus has to be for a domestic politics podcast today. For the whole of this year, for the whole of 2025 to date, really, we're in this political stasis as a three-way fight between the Tories, Labour, and Reform. We've got the latest polling this morning. We've got Labour out in front on 24, Reform down a couple of points, actually, 23 on 23. That's within the margin of error, so you can't actually say that there's a statistically significant change. But has there perhaps been in this polling taken Sunday, Monday, just a tiny bit of the air come out of the balloon, given all the fuss that's been going on? Tories on 22, Lib Dems on 15, and Greens on 9. But I think the discussion of this poll, statistically fairly or otherwise, will be about Reform. Interesting that Reform's ex-MP, Rupert Lowe, was suspended, giving interviews last night online saying that he doesn't rule out joining the Tories, saying, I was a Tory years ago. There are some extremely good Tory MPs. I get on with a lot of them.
Do you think that's an unalloyed blessing for the Conservatives?
Yes, you have to be accepted, I think, certainly in order to be given the whip in the House of Commons. There would have to be an active choice by the party authorities to admit him to the parliamentary party, and it is fascinating whether or not Kemi Badenoch would be up for that. But that just all does contribute to that sense of turbulence. Elon Musk, apparently, according to the Financial Times today, saying that he's sort of Musk allies hinting he's sort of gone off Reform and could back an alternative to Reform financially in the weeks and months to come. So all of that feels like we're still in the sort of spin cycle of this story, and we'll see how it comes out the other end. But there's certainly a lot of churn.
So the introduction of the planning bill to me feels like the start of the next part of this government story, Sam. And it's interesting seeing Angela Rayner there out and about, making clear that the infrastructure push is what she wants the government to be judged on, and that she thinks that will unite the interests both of business and the growth agenda, but also that sense that the country just needs sorting out, if you remember, was the kind of thing that Keir Starmer talked a lot about as we were going into the election. But we haven't heard really so much from Keir Starmer himself about his vision. So I'm wondering what you make of this, because for me, that combination of, if you like, the nuts and bolts of the planning stuff coming through, at the same time as Keir Starmer is off talking to MPs last night in Westminster, his own MPs, about those impending welfare cuts, and making a very clear pitch that he doesn't really expect to get much pushback from Labour on this. He says it's the worst of all world situation, wrong incentives stopping people from working or getting into the workforce. This felt to me almost like Keir Starmer was beginning to lay out his vision again, but of course now he's really quite far into his government. So something needs to happen fast, as well as saying, well, this is the way that I would like the country to be run.
Absolutely. Look, I think the sort of biggest essay question for this government is Keir Starmer genuinely a reformer and a transformer who is prepared to take bold and tough decisions? Or is he just somebody who dresses up in the language of bold and tough decisions, borrowed from the past, borrowed from the Blair era, borrowed from countless prime ministers who sort of cosplay reform but don't actually end up doing that? And that applies to all sorts of things, and we will only find out in time whether that's the case. But it applies particularly today because we've got the planning bill. And I think there's a good argument to say that the planning bill, in all of its monumental and complex detail, is one of the most important pieces of legislation this government's going to do, because this government says its number one priority is growth. This government says you get growth by unblocking the blocks in the planning system. And this is the day where they do the big show and tell of precisely the ways in which they're going to do it. So I don't think you can overstate just how important it is. But I think the great big problem with this is, does it do what they say it does on the tin? Does the reality match the rhetoric? And also, you are going to see countless ministers going up, and I'm sorry, Matthew Pennicott, this is going to be a lot about you, but countless ministers going up on broadcast on stations like Sky right now. He's due at 7:50 in the morning, talking up what this bill will do. But you've got to remember, we've only got the very, very, very first draft of this, and really, you need to judge this legislation when it's come out the other end of the parliamentary process. And there is a good chance that some of it has watered down because it is complex and it is contentious and there are different vested interests in it. So they can say all that they want today, but this is only the beginning of a long journey, and I can't quite sniff where the rebellions and the revolts and the changes are going to have to be. But today isn't the day that we can definitively say this is the boldest possible government on planning. But in a moment, we'll go through what they are doing and try and make some preliminary judges. But be careful of being swept away in the rhetoric, because judging this is really hard.
That's so interesting, because I was just looking at Angela Rayner's language. She's written it in the Times, talking about the biggest boom for a generation, seismic reforms. I mean, there's certainly no shortage of hyperbolic language around this. You also sometimes wonder whether is that was such a great idea, because you know you're going to end up back in an argument about bat tunnels, in which you are an internationally acclaimed expert, and you do end up sort of having to, I think, make quite difficult choices. Not everyone wants seismic planning reforms right close to them. So I'm really interested in how the government pitches it. Is it, well, you've just got to put up with this because we say so, or can they really take people with them? And when you go into localities, that is the conversation people are having, right? Then few of them are sitting there saying, you know what I really want right now is a seismic planning reform.
Let's just go through some of the measures, because, I mean, we're going to have to go into the detail to evaluate in any significant way what's going on. So the government say there are about 7 or 8 big things in this. I'm going to just trot through them. So they're saying that they're going to overhaul planning committees and councils, right? So the first thing to notice is, broadly speaking, they're keeping planning committees on councils, that the essential existing structure stays. This is a change to it. Some might say a tweak to it. What they're doing is they're changing what types of applications should be determined by officers versus what should go to committee, which should be determined by councillors. So we will see how much of an effect that is. But buried in the press release as well, in that section, is a revelation that councils will be allowed to set their own planning fees to cover their costs, because at the moment there's apparently a deficit of £360 million in this area. But the first thing that strikes me is that the bigger bit of that press release is exactly that the costs of applying to do planning sound like they're about to shoot up. So that's kind of small little alarm bell number one. Secondly, their big transformation, the thing that they claim will stop future bat tunnels is a new plan that's been bubbling away for a few months called the Nature Restoration Fund. What the Nature Restoration Fund does is allow a number of projects to sort of pay money into a fund, and those individual projects don't then have to worry about particular environmental regulations, and the government or appointed organisations take care of that. The question is, lawyers are extremely sceptical that this will work where there are big infrastructure projects like HS2 and problems like bats. Ministers will tell you today the bat tunnel problem is solved. Lawyers cannot see how that is the case while the underlying European regulations stay on the books. Couple of other things. There's compulsory purchase changes. This is apparently going to upset the farmers. The government is going to reduce the amount of compensation due, and there are going to be reductions in the number of times that a campaigner or a NIMBY can challenge various projects in court. However, the changes are to meritless cases. So meritless cases will not be able to go through lots of different challenges. But of course, most cases that go to court, people do because they think they have merit. They wouldn't waste the money on them if they didn't. So it's not clear to me just how big a transformation that will be. And then a final one, which has got a lot of coverage, which is payments for people who live near new pylons. The press release boldly calls this payments of £2,500 over 10 years. That's 250 quid a year. The sort of communities protesting against pylons point out that is absolute peanuts compared to the damage that they do. So it feels like a bit of a mixed bag. It's complicated, but you only see why when you dive that far into the detail. So we're just going to have to wait and see whether all of this results in new things popping up over the country in 4 years' time when there's the next general election.
We'll check back in on the bats as well. Can I just add something there on the tone of this, Sam? And I don't know if it struck you as well. We're listening to Keir Starmer, or rather his choice of words, when he was obviously building much more here on the welfare point. I think there's a sense that the government needs to have a tone, and it's found it very much on international affairs in the Ukraine crisis. But it was really interesting for me hearing Keir Starmer. I'd almost sort of forgotten what his voice sounded like domestically. I'm not sure Number 10 press officer will thank me for that observation, but because he's been so focused on his relationships abroad. And he started to talk with his MPs last night, and these obviously quotes that they put out, saying that the welfare system at the moment is unsustainable, unfair. People feel it in their bones. It runs contrary to deep British values, namely that you should go to work if you can. And it was interesting for me, almost feeling that Keir Starmer is going into a kind of campaign mode while he's Prime Minister. Do you know what I mean?
One of the things that people are picking up at the moment is that a lot of the domestic agenda is being communicated through a campaign prism. And there's many reasons why that's a good thing. And of course, Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, is at heart a campaign person rather than a domestic policy expert and reformer. But where that leads Keir Starmer is very, very big rhetorical promises. But again, whether it's welfare, whether it's planning, you get the sense that he's pushing himself into the toughest possible kind of position on these things. The question is, can he then back out of it, bring enough people with him, do a bold enough reform, or do things end up being a damp squib or dying in the face of opposition? And that's the sort of conundrum about Keir Starmer, that we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah,
but if you think about what's happened since Christmas, Sam, I mean, one thing I noticed is if you actually keep an eye on who's who and who's doing what in Number 10. You're seeing a lot more of those people. They're not the people who speak in public, like Liz Lloyd, coming back there as a policy coordinator, very loyal to Morgan McSweeney and that vision you've just laid out so well there. But these are the people who are there to join the dots and help this delivery. Michael Barber is still around from the all of us know Michael Barber being involved in delivery units since the dawn of Blairite time. But a lot of those people are now into their jobs, and they're into that second month of your job when you actually start to really do something. So I think there will be something coming forward. It'll be really interesting then to see. You can see it in the civil service reform plans. You have some people in place. One of them, and I will let them remain nameless, said the problem is on policy. Labour had sort of forgotten what good looked like. They know how to campaign well, but they've forgotten long time out of power, and then the Jeremy Corbyn era in which policy had a completely different complexion. They want to get back to policy looking like something at the centre of this government. Let's see if they get there.
Sounds like we're basically on the same page, but no more can be said about it because the alarm has gone off. That's us done. 20 minutes is up. We will be back tomorrow, Wednesday, PMQ's Day, for Politics at Sam and Anne's. See you then.
PMQs, yay. Bye, Sam.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.